Good evening. You're listening live to the Extreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Alongside me tonight is Professor Pixel, aka Professor Peaks, aka I don't know what else to call you, Professor, because we've just finished season 2 of Twin Peaks, the wonderful TV show that kind of took a nosedive in season 2, and we just recently finished that. Now we're doing in chronological order, since we're continuing through the series, the movie that came out in 1992, Fire, Walk With Me, that David Lynch came back, helmed the return of it, directed it himself. Much different than season 2, I would start off by saying. And then this, of course, we'd have this huge gap between this and when Showtime would put out in 2017 the season 3 that we're going to be reviewing after this. Now, I will start off by saying, Pixel, that for Fire Walk With Me, when it came out, everybody was over the Twin Peaks phenomenon because they were so pissed at ABC and having Laura Palmer's murderer actually presented to you. And then it took us in some weird directions, and we covered that in our most recent recap of episode 22, which was a strong finish, I think. What I like about Fire Walk With Me, just to start off the bat, is it takes us back, in my opinion, to what season 1 is really like. The heart of season 1 is, of course, the mystery of who killed Laura Palmer. But we already know all this. And if you've watched all of it, or even season 1, you're gonna think that this movie's a lot like what season 1 was. And to me, it's a lot darker. The music's just as foreboding. It really feels like what season was. It feels like Twin Peaks to me. And I will tell you that when a movie came out, from personal experience, 30 years ago approximately, when I saw it in the theaters, nobody was in the theater. It bombed financially. People were pissed off about it. And I think there's a fair amount of people that wanted to tune in occasionally to try to see, oh, what is this Twin Peaks all about? And then you're going, what the hell is going on in this movie? Because this movie's got some weird shit in it. So overall, I liked it. I think it's very good. I think some hardcore fans really love it, and some people despise it. It's that type of movie. What are your initial thoughts?
Well, I didn't know what exactly to expect. I know we talked a little bit about it before, saying that, oh, well, it's definitely a prequel. And then you would say, well, not sure about that. And I can see why you say that now. But overall, it is definitely good for Twin Peaks fans. If you were not a fan of the show, though, and you went to go see this movie, you would just leave saying, what the hell did I just watch?
Yeah.
But I guess the only way to explain is to get through. And so let's go ahead and start. After an intro through some static, we see a TV set that's hit and a woman screaming. And then there's a body just floating. And we immediately cut to David Lynch playing Gordon Cole. And he calls to an agent named Chet, and he needs to meet him at an airport because a girl has been murdered. So he lands with Sam Stanley, played by Kiefer Sutherland, and he introduces the two. And Gordon says, I have a surprise for you, and shows a girl named Lil, and explains how this is Gordon's mother's sister's girl before he sends Sam and Chet off. As they're driving, Sam asks, what was that all about with the dancing girl? Because Lil was doing a whole little dancing act in a red dress. And Chet goes ahead and say, okay, well, what was she doing? And each movement has an explanation. And Chet goes ahead and answers, and how his mother's sister girl means that possibly connected to the sheriff. And then the dance isn't the only thing, though. They talk about the red dress, and he says, I can explain everything except the blue rose. Don't ask me about the blue rose. Almost immediately afterwards, they arrive at this sheriff's station. I believe it's called Deer Creek Sheriff's Department, something like that.
Deer Meadow.
Yeah. The agents go in ready to meet Sheriff Cable. This deputy's there and tells him just go ahead and take a seat, get some coffee, and says, "Oh, well, it's a week old, so that's as fresh as you're gonna get it." And he and the desk girl are just laughing. And there's something off about this town, but these people do seem a little special to me. Chet then takes him by the nose, pushes him down against the wall next to the desk, and asks the lady at the front for a fresh pot of coffee before going to the sheriff. Sheriff Cable pretty much makes it clear that he does not like them there. He doesn't like any agents being sent. "Oh, we can handle it." And ultimately, Chet says, "I want the files. And I am from the federal government. You're going to give them to me." Sheriff does give them and explains that the body's in the back. And before he leaves, he stares at a picture of Cable bending a steel bar. But he goes ahead and he leaves the office, and that's when the deputy returns before we cut.
Well, for me, just starting off, a couple of interesting things I think about these few minutes. You're obviously, for those that have watched, and for those who haven't watched, sometimes you forget what's on TV, and a year later a film comes out, and you're like, "Oh yeah, what's going on?" There's a lot of characters in Twin Peaks, a lot of locations, a lot of Easter eggs, a lot of non sequiturs, that type of thing. And in here, we're of course talking about what was referenced early on in season 1 when Agent Cooper mentioned that there was another murder very similar when we saw him during him take the letter out of Laura Palmer's fingernail, because that's exactly what happens here. This is that murder. Now, he's not a part of this investigation at this time per se. It's these two other detectives that we see it. And what I think is kind of neat about it too is at the time you had a very popular singer with us, Chris Isaacs, with a song called "Wicked Game." It had I think a swimsuit model on it at the time. It's a very haunting tune. It's incredible. He plays one of the detectives in here, and he's like the main detective. And just as a side note, when they get the call from Gordon Cole, they're busy busting up a prostitution ring because I guess some girls are being transported on a high school bus, which I thought was funny. But the girls who are dressed up, that is so 80s. And then when Sheriff Cable's muscle comes out to give them some grief and get in the way, he's got that 80s mustache he's rocking, and they are snarking it up. But I'm like, wow, I guess the FBI can't get away with strong arming small town people because nobody likes it when you come in. It's just a pissing contest. And it's interesting. In here, we get some parallels to what we've already experienced from season 1, which makes it feel comfortable. You got a pair of people going through an investigation of a murdered female. And in this case here, we're talking about a lady named Teresa Banks. And for her, when they're investigating, they find that there's a letter under her name as well. It's the ring finger. And so technically it's the first time that this has happened, even though we've seen season 1, which is in the future. But to me, this kind of moves very brisk. It's edited really quick where we don't get a lot of back information going on, where if you watch the deleted scenes, you'd see a whole bunch more with a fist fight and the steel cable being actually bent, all sorts of stuff. But it's kind of neat. And this is one of those things where if you're really on point with Twin Peaks and they mention all these names, you're like, yeah, this all means something. But if you're watching it for the first time, or you weren't heavily invested watching it, a lot of stuff's going to go over your head, because the investigations, they're basically pointing to this place called the Fat Trout Trailer Park where she stayed. And when they get there, it's a location we haven't seen before. Obviously, it's on the other side of town. They're not in Twin Peaks, actually. Twin Peaks is a little bit off, but it's somewhat cool. They have a brief overnight stop in a diner where there's an interesting exchange with the lady who runs it, and makes some comments about how she'd been late and how her arm for a few days seemed like it wasn't working. It had gone numb. And of course, it's the 80s, late 90s here, early 90s here. Everybody's smoking in all the scenes. That's one thing I forget, is just how much people smoked back in the day. Kiefer Sutherland plays kind of the dweebish, bookish guy with a bow tie, and I don't think he does a bad job in here. I mean, he wasn't the Kiefer that people would know today, but then people really didn't think of Chris Isaacs as an actor too. But David Lynch, when he sees people actually does a good job of saying, hey, I see in them what I want in my film. I can find something that works. That's what he does. So when they actually get to the town, I pop because this guy that was in like a bunch of things. Harry Dean Stanton is his name. He's an older actor. I think he's passed away now too. He was in Escape from New York with Snake Plissken. He's the manager of this really rundown, shabby place. And one thing I wanted to point out here, as I'll hand it over here in a moment, is that this trailer park we haven't seen before. When we're watching this film, there's a few scenes already with them flying in on a local chartered plane that just looks nice. This is really beautiful looking. It's as sharp as that first episode, which is actually, I think, might have been a TV movie at the time. 2 episodes, made as a movie rather than 1 episode at a time. This just feels big. It feels large. It feels like it belongs on here. This does not feel like an afterthought that they're just slapping crap together in a money grab. Not at all. And when they get to Teresa Banks's place, they're looking at it and they see a picture of her, and on her left hand, where they had noticed there was not a ring when they're investigating her, they see like this jade ring with this kind of symbol you can't quite make out on it or whatever. I like this. It's an interesting scene, but it feels serious and doesn't feel too goofy or whatever, because Teresa Banks, as we come to find out, is only like 18, 19 years old. She's a runaway. She's a prostitute, doing tricks on the side. We'll find out here that she was in Flesh World. And that's how she met people, which is a very important point of this movie. But also she worked at the diner, which they're finding out too. But there's just something grimy about this whole location and the scene. The lady that comes and pops her head and then walks off, and that never gets explored, and the hum of electricity and some other stuff there too. So yeah, it really feels like we're in the middle of another mystery. And even though it's very familiar, it seems more ominous because we know what it's going to lead to, or at least that's what I felt while watching it. What about you?
There's a lot that's left unexplored here, because in that diner scene, whenever they talk to what's her name, Irene, I think, there's a couple at the end of the bar, an older man and a young woman, and he asks after a while, "Are you talking about that poor little girl who was murdered?"
Yeah.
They answer him the first time, and then the woman next to him whispers something in his ear, and we can't make out what it is.
It's Paris talk, yeah.
And it's left for a moment, and they go back to talking to Irene. Then the guy asks the same question, and this time they just ignore him. They don't answer anything. But getting to the trailer park, you're absolutely right. And it is a very grimy kind of place. The old dirty woman who just peeks in and then walks away with an ice over her eye. Like, were you eat or something? We don't know. And she doesn't say anything. We flash over to this electric pole and go down. We see the number 6, but we don't know anything about that. And the owner, after that moment, says he's already gone places and just wants to say where he is. Not like anybody really asked, but
yeah.
But from there, we go to the woods, quickly returning to the sheriff's office. And the sheriff quickly says that they're not taking the body, but Chet says they absolutely are. They are within their right to do so. There's nothing they can do about it. And then he asks about the missing ring. And the sheriff is silent for a moment, looks at him and says, "We have a phone that has a little ring." And I don't even know. They just start laughing. These people seem ridiculous. But
they're just mocking the FBI. Small towns hate outsiders, and so I think Lynch is going for the exaggeration here. Obviously, he's like, "I'm looking for that little ring on her finger." He's like, "Yeah, it's a little ring or something," and they're just mocking him, and that's it. Yeah, it's like, okay, what the hell are you talking about?
But after that, Chet goes out and tells Sam, "You're going to go back with the body, and I'm going to head back to the park real quick." And Sam says, I know why you're going back. You're going for the Blue Rose. And Chet doesn't answer before he just goes to the trailer park. The manager there points out the deputy's trailer and where Teresa's trailer was, where they were before. And that's when Chet doesn't go either direction. He looks at this one trailer with the lights on, goes up, and he goes ahead and knocks. There's no answer. After a moment, Chet lowers himself, and in the dirt, we're able to make out what he sees. A ring with a green gem and a strange marking in it that we've seen before. But from there, we quickly cut to Philadelphia. Cooper is going to Gordon, says the time and date, and saying that he's worried because of the dream he told him about. Quickly, we move to Cooper in the hall, and he's standing in front of the camera and walking into the security room. Then he goes to stand in front of the camera and then walks into the security room like he's looking for something. Then he goes one more time. And that's when the elevator opens up. And Cooper then goes in as we see David Bowie walking behind him. And
yes, that David Bowie. For those, who's worked the Lynch before on Dune.
And that's when Cooper goes into the security office and he sees himself standing there as David Bowie passes right by him. So quickly, Cooper's making his way, calling out to Gordon. Bowie is named Philip. I don't remember his last name. And he goes to Gordon Cole. He's an agent that's been missing for, I believe, over a year. And he asks who the hell Cooper is whenever Cooper bursts into the room. And that's when the screen starts to flash. We see a long-nosed man, it looks like. And that's when we completely cut away from the real world. It's a meeting of sorts. And Philip says, pretty much, I've been to one of their meetings, and I think this is what this is. We see the little man, Bob, and other spirits, including the little boy with the older woman, and I believe one other. And as they're sitting there, the boy is playing with a mask that also has a long nose. And he covers his face, and then whenever he moves it, it's suddenly a monkey. And that's when we cut between the red room and finally back to reality, as Gordon is saying, he's gone. He's disappeared. That's when somebody calls from the front and says he was never there. And that they just got a call, and Agent Chet has disappeared.
Yeah, it's one thing Lynch likes to do is have people in there, like I said, that have a quality he's looking for. In this case, David Bowie. I don't believe we really see David Bowie the rest of this at all. And same thing with Kiefer Sutherland's character, the second detective on the Teresa Banks murder. Of course, this is sometime in the future, so the head guy here is missing, and that's what they're trying to figure out. But it's kind of a shock to go, wait a minute, here's an agent, David Bowie's character, that's been missing, shows up, complains about stuff, and then it just seems like he's not there at all. You're like, what the hell is going on here? Because it doesn't just seem like it's something that Cooper sees. It's all of them see it. Albert's in there and his boss. It's like, okay, so this is not the goofy stuff. Hey, let's all stand around making weird jokes about coffee and cherry pie. It's what the F? And since they're in Philadelphia and they're at a field office too, you know that it just gives you the sense that they're working on something bigger, which again, you, as an FBI agent, you go around all the places, you get involved in things too. So it's pretty neat. What I like here is that it kind of connects the old stuff with the new. and being a prequel, you're looking to see how they do it, and does it enhance both in a way. Like, you could obviously watch season 1 without watching this because that's what happened, but it would be very difficult to watch this movie without really watching season 1, because what happens here is Cooper, he has to go to this place, Deer Meadow, this small town outside of Twin Peaks, to look up Desmond, who's missing. And so we're like, okay, it has been a while. We know stuff's up with it. We know that the place is grimy and dirty. It's great when it's investigating. He notices, hey, there's some tracks that were next to a trailer, next to a fence, and they're not there anymore. And he looks at the agent's car that was left there, and it's, dusty or whatever, and on the front it's got "Let's Rock" written in cursive on there, and looks like it's written, whether it's in blood or lipstick or something shiny red, as we'd say. He talks to Diane in the tape, which makes you pop for it, and then we get the 1 year later, "Oh, welcome to Twin Peaks" sign and everything. We got to cut to Laura. Before we get there, I wanted to throw in here, we're about 35, 40 minutes in the movie. It's a long movie. It's about 2 hours long. So we're about a fourth of the way, almost a third of the way here. We've met almost all the characters, and we're going to start to see where things start happening. What did you think of this movie not necessarily having the familiar opening thing that we were used to on the TV show?
I was very saddened by it. I was really hoping they'd try to fit that in somehow, but they don't. Even if it was here, because they flash to Twin Peaks and they're playing Laura's theme, and they could go ahead and do the typical transition shots before they go ahead and cut to Laura, but they don't. Quickly, they do cut to Laura. It's her throughout her day. She calls for Donna, who's been recast, played by another woman. You see Mike with Bobby. Then they see James flashing through moments in during the school, and they quickly cut to the end of the day. Laura goes into a stall for some
Sweet nose candy, baby.
No, yeah, that's how to say it. And by the time they push forward, it cuts to Laura suddenly in a towel. She goes into a back room and as we see James. We also see Bobby walking through the school, and he stops at a trophy case where Laura's picture is put up, and he goes ahead and kisses it and says hi. But that's when we quickly cut to James and Laura, and she tells him that she's pretty much already gone, like a turkey in the wind, something like that. And James goes to say that turkeys are the dumbest bird, and that's when she looks at him and she goes, "Gobble, gobble, gobble."
Like a turkey in the corn, baby.
James asks her to never leave because he'll never leave her. Then they go ahead and kiss, and they go ahead and pull down the towel. And that's what were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say nothing like a little boning on high school grounds in the janitor's closet with a coked up woman that's obviously got mental issues there too. What I liked about the scene is we're drawn back into the high school, which is one of the very first prominent scenes we see in episode 1 of season 1 of Twin Peaks. And of course, we get to see Bobby in his high school dress coming out here. And Bobby's got that crazy look in his eye like he doesn't need cocaine. He meets her afterwards. He's like, "Where you been? What's going on?" Because he's the guy that basically has had everything. But now that he's lost Laura to James, he kind of wants her back. And he basically is trying to tell her, "Hey, you need to be back." And she's not having of it. But I thought the scene on the outside where they're walking away at the end of the school day, I thought Laura did a really great job of like placating to his desires, just kind of defusing the situation, smiling at him, or because Laura's pretty, she's not what we would call smoking hot. And I'm not saying she's ugly, but there's ways as men we sometimes categorize women, just like there's certain ways women categorize men, whether it's handsome or boyish or mature, whatever. And I think it's safe to say here that they did capture that, late 80s, early 90s kind of style there too, because they're not dressed like you would see in a teen movie today or anything. It works. And it does seem very much like high school. You see Bobby being kind of a goof and all that. But the interesting thing, too, is they spend a little bit of time on a relationship here in this next scene between Donna and her, because we know Laura's whacked in the head. We know she's involved in bad stuff. We know Donna maybe really wasn't. But really what the essence of the scene is that they're talking about the fact Donna wants to lose her virginity, and she's trying to figure out. And the interesting thing with Laura is, I mentioned she diffused Bobby's attitude. She seems to be like extremely mature out of everybody, even though she was the valedictorian, the cheerleader, the number one person in the school class, and she's got problems. But she says, why with Mike? You don't even like him. And it's like she just knows the essence of the people that are in her life. And whether you say people do that sometimes and they're phony about it currently, like in high school or something like that, Laura seems pretty real about it, which I think makes her a little bit intriguing rather than just a piece of flesh that we didn't really get to know too well in that. So this actually kind of takes Laura Palmer, even though she died in that first episode, 5 minutes in, wrapped in that plastic bag. We're filling out some of her, some things that may be pluses and minuses. So they're talking about the boys in their life and what's going on, looking kind of despondent. It's kind of a neat scene too, because we're like, yeah, she's kind of a sad sack or whatever. She goes home, Laura does. She gets out her secret diary from in that little alcove that we know we're going to see Bob in. She's smoking, writing in it and stuff. I thought this was a pretty nice extended scene for Laura. I did. What did you think?
I mean, we never really got to see Laura in action, as it were, in the original series. So I guess this is a way to show who she was without them just telling us. But where we've seen her in the situations in which she controls, in this scene where she goes home and grabs her diary, we see her lose some. Why? Because as she's flipping through, there's a whoosh, and pages are in fact missing from her diary, and she's shaking. Yes. She rushes downstairs and drives to Mr. Harold Smith.
Yes! The agoraphobic orchid guy. I love this guy. Oh, I'm so happy he was in this too. Lynch, we're going to find out here, did a great job of bringing everybody back who either A, wanted to be back, could be back, and gives them some screen time, just like he did in the very last episode of season 2, where I said he gave everybody a little bit of screen time. He's doing that here with Harold. This is great. Go ahead and take this scene.
Yeah. Well, there, Laura quickly goes in, and he can tell she's upset, and says that pages are missing from her diary. And he says, who would do that? And she quickly says, Bob would take her pages. And he goes ahead and says, but Bob's not real. Quickly, Laura says, he is real. He's been visiting her at night ever since she was 12. And how he says he wants to be her, or he'll kill her. Quickly, Mr. Smith gets close to her, and she looks at him, and then she says, fire, walk with me. And there's a flash to a messed up looking Laura, and she's kind of ghoulish before she sobs. And he tries to comfort her, and then she asks him to hide her diary. She quickly pulls him into a kiss before she goes ahead and she leaves and explains how she may never return.
Harold Smith was the empathy machine. I love this guy. It was such a weird character that was a little different and quirky than some of the other bombastic stuff that we've seen. So I thought it was fantastic. Just tremendous. Lynch did base this off of a person in real life from like 100 plus years ago. When I was doing our research, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Here we don't quite get the idea that he's agoraphobic, other than he looks really despondent because he can't open a door and go after Laura. And then he looked kind of like happy, surprised, like she's pulling in for a kiss. Hey, she really wants it, like he was happy to just be her friend and listen. But poor Mr. Smith, he was a lonely soul. It's neat here as we get a scene after she leaves of Laura kind of staring up at the ceiling fan in her house, and we get like some red drapes kind of crossing through and flashing of lights, but it quickly gets built over by Agent Cooper in the office talking to Albert. And this is neat because Cooper's not being a goof. He's like, this is going to happen again. And Albert's like, yeah, right, whatever. Because Albert's, of course, the man of science and facts. Cooper's got a little bit of the mysticism and kind of instinct that he's right on the subconscious part of his brain. And so Albert asks him these questions. Who's it going to be? And he says, well, it's going to be a woman. She's going to be blonde. She's going to be sexually active. She does drugs. And he's like, well, congratulations. That's half the high school girls out there. But it gives us a little bit more of Albert and his relationship too. So it just didn't feel like it was a one-off. We get a scene from there now that we've spent a lot of time outside of Twin Peaks, except for just the Laura scene. Now we're starting to see some of the peripheral characters of it, because we get Shelley at the diner with Norma, and Heidi, the German that I just don't remember. She was laughing and giggling about boning her old man in one of the last episodes last season. She's in here. She's got a busted nose. Laura's in there doing Meals on Wheels, which we know she's going to go see some people. And Shelley gets talked into it, basically told to go help her out because it's a slow day. And again, this being shot outside, it's beautiful. You see them walking back and forth to Laura's car. But while Laura's out there by herself and Shelley walks in, she sees the old lady that has the little kid that from season 2 was Harold Smith's neighbors. They were the Meals on Wheels people. Yet this older lady and this young looking kid actually were in the room above the convenience store that we saw the vertically challenged individual. I don't know if he was arguing, but him and Mike were going at it. They were sitting there in the background where you had the guy with the party mask on jumping around and a few others in there, like an electrician kind of guy and one or two others. The spirit room, as I like to call it. So this is kind of interesting. The old lady's name is Mr. Chalfant, and the young kid is the one that made the cream corn disappear in season 2 from the Meals on Wheels when it was delivered then into his hands, and the old lady was like, oh, that's magic. And then here it's like, okay, what the hell is this corn, cream corn? Or it's not really cream corn, I guess maybe it is down here in the South. Our cream corn looks different, but it's like corn soup or whatever. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but it's just kind of weird watching them walk across this intersection to basically give her a photo of, looks like a red room that says, this will look comfortable in your room. And I don't know if it's that silly, if you're just tuning in going, what the hell's going on? Because the kid's got a similar mask on that the dancer one did from the flashback. So the man behind the mask is looking for the book with the pages torn out, is what the kid says to her, and is going towards the hiding place. So she feels like what she's looking for is going to get discovered, and she's not going to have that. They take off, and then we get a cut to where she goes home, and she goes in her place, and we get some weird looking kind of stuff from Laura to just, what do you want to say about it?
Yeah, well, when she goes ahead and goes home, and she's looking around silently, it's building up to where she gets into her room, and who does she see but Bob?
Just a quick vision, yeah. During the day and everything, yep.
Behind the dresser where she hid her diary. Quickly, Laura runs and goes under some bushes at the neighbor's house to cry.
Mm-hmm.
As we see somebody walk out of her house. It's her dad, Leland Palmer. Laura's saying, no. It's not him. And she has, after that, she goes ahead and she runs. She runs to Donna and asks if she's her best friend. And of course, Donna says yes. Leads her inside because clearly she's upset. We quickly cut back to the house that following night, and Leland is at the table. Laura comes home, and he says, hi, honey. How is everything with Donna? And Laura says it's fine. He goes ahead and asks her to sit, and if she's hungry. She says, no, not really. And after a moment, he sort of looks upset and says, I bet you didn't wash your hands before sitting down for dinner, did you? He goes over and he takes her hands and says, "Look, it's so dirty." And he points to her ring finger and under the nail and says, "Look under this nail. It's filthy." That's when finally Sarah comes in and screams at him pretty much to stop, Leland. Leland does stop, goes to the table and says, "Oh, I'll stop. We're going to have dinner, but not until Laura cleans her filthy, filthy hands." To
me, as much as this scene sounds kind of goofy, I think this is a terrifying scene because we know he's the one that's been violating her since she was 12 and she's 18 now. So for 6 years, he's had his way with her and she doesn't really know it. So one of the theories is she's, all these spirits and everything, it's just a made up sort of thing to disguise what happens when you suffer from severe trauma, in this case, sexual abuse. We don't necessarily know of any others, but when he's sitting at the table and she walks in, he doesn't say after, "Hey, how's it going, honey?" Like, I'm out one day. He's like, "How's school?" Then he's like, "Sit down." And this guy really wise, just we talked about before, when we saw the scene of him murdering Laura was one of the best scenes in all of Twin Peaks. And that was a highlight of season 2. But when he comes over to her, he had noticed that the half heart of whatever pendant on her necklace that early on in season 1, we saw this mysterious person taken as being Dr. Jacoby, I believe, if I'm correct, and he hid in a coconut. He's going over there and he's like pinching her cheek and he's like, just looking at her like, how dare anybody else? The way I took it was, or somebody could take it too, is how dare anybody else touch the one that I'm touching? I'm the father. I get it first. Nobody else is supposed to have it. It's a very possessive thing. And the wife comes in and she's distraught and she just does a great job of looking that way. And she's like, "Well, they don't call them, lovers in high school anymore. Like shame on him for using that outdated term, right?" So it seems like the mother may know what's going on, or at least, whatever, but she's so passive. She's not really doing anything. She kind of basically says, "Stop. You don't know what she likes." And he's like, "How do you know what she likes?" And I thought that's really disgusting because in his mind, he's thinking about what she likes. Because we see, that Laura crying by herself, and then a little later in the evening, he's in bed and he's bawling his ass off, and he goes in to apologize to Laura, and he seems really genuine. And that's where this actor just has nailed it every time he's been on screen. That, again, we've talked about Piper Laurie playing Catherine Martell as a real standout thing. I think Ray Wise has done a phenomenal job because while this whole show's not about him, he's the main bad guy in terms of the vessel for what happens, despite whatever reason may be, whether it's the spirit Bob and whatnot that we'll talk about here a little later. The guy just nails it. She looks up at a photo in her room that has like an guardian angel, like it's something. It looks like the Last Supper, kind of, sort of, just with a few small characters in it. And then she sees it disappear kind of quick, and she goes to bed at night. She has a dream. And the dream is the picture that Mrs. Chaffon had given her of this room with a door in it with some red drapes. And in this dream, it seems like this old lady's pointing her through the door. So in her dream, she goes through and she sees the young boy who snaps his fingers and a light comes on and we see a table. So we're in the waiting room with the vertically challenged individual with Coop, and there's a ring. The ring that we talked about before. And there's a little bit some dialogue between them where he says, "Oh, I sound like this," and he makes some sort of little woo 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 with his mouth, which it descends in pitch. So we could talk about, if we want to get very nerdy, because there seems to be some time elements here. Why are we going to hear where Laura can observe what's going on in this room, it appears, where he's getting the ring? Because if they're jumping around in time, they always talk about, if a train's going towards a particular place, if it's going away or going towards, the pitch changes, right? And so people use that to talk about the difference with time. And we talk about time dilation, length contraction, if you get into modern physics and all that stuff at a really high energetic level. So it was kind of weird that they cut to me, Dale getting the ring from the vertically challenged guy, and then Laura I felt like she was observing it, but then I guess I'm not sure, because she kind of wakes up But I guess she doesn't really wake up because she sees the bloodied and battered Annie Blackburn laying next to her, with all the blood in her face that we had saw from the last episode in season 2. And then she seems to disappear, and Laura's just,
What?
No matter what she's going through, she's just bugging out and everything too. But then we see kind of her looking at herself in the picture on the wall in a black dress, and then she seems to wake up the next day. So it's a very dreamlike, trancy kind of sequence.
We missed something very important in Annie's scene, because she does get to say something.
Well,
she explains how the good Dale and Laura are in the lodge and they can't leave. And Dale in the dream actually said not to take the ring. And when Laura woke up the first time, she had the ring in the palm of her hand. And that's when she goes to the door, and it's between her looking from the stairs and then looking back, she's in the photo. And then that's when it does cut to the next morning. She really wakes up. She doesn't have the ring in her hand. The painting doesn't have Laura. And that's when Laura goes ahead and takes the picture down. We quickly cut from there to Shelley and Leo. And he's cleaning the floor and says, "This is how you do it, Shelley." And she's like, "I have to get ready for work." And she's like really throwing off whatever he's saying. And that's when he takes her and he slaps her and tells her not to go anywhere as the phone rings. Because he wants to show her how to do the floor right. Bobby's calling. He says the football is empty and he's looking for Santa Claus. And Leo explains how you still owe me money. You're not getting anything. Bobby then leans close into the phone and says, "Leo, are you telling me Santa Claus doesn't exist?" That's when Leo goes ahead and hangs up the phone. So Bobby calls down at the Roadhouse. It's Jacques Renault, and he's definitely interested and sets up something for later. You.
No, I was going to say was that I like the little quick scene here with Bobby and Shelley, or not Bobby, but Leo and Shelley, because we know Shelley's adverse to doing any work at all at home too. She sits on her ass and doesn't do a damn thing. She only does it at the diner when she feels good. And even though he's abusive and a bad dude, Leo, I just think he loves. Doesn't love playing a bad guy in a scene? I thought this is one of those little 3-5 minute scenes that you do if you're in an acting class or improv or whatever, where you can just say, let's take it in this direction. Now let's act this way, because she's interested in the fact that Leo's talking about money, and he's on his knees doing some of the late 80s kind of nonsense about having a good work ethic, and you have to have pride in your home, and this is where you eat, and standards and all that. And you know what? You could easily argue in a way Leo's right, even though he's a real jerk about the way he does it, because he tries to smack her upside the head, and he really doesn't hit her, but you're like, how dare he do that or whatever. But she's like, oh my God, $5,000. So, it's like they're kind of like an appropriate couple too. At least Bobby's a mover and shaker trying to make things happen. So I always appreciated that. But it's a small little plot that's not big, but it's only important because of the fact that we know there's a lot of bad stuff going on, and Laura's involved in the heart of everybody's life, it seems, because we do see in the next scene Laura dressed up as a young adult, let's say, and Donna's shown up as well, dressed very nice as well, and Laura's enjoying an adult beverage, and they're talking, and we see her where they've been smoking some cigarettes or whatever, and they get ready to go out to the Bang Bang Bar. And as she's going to the Bang Bang Bar, which we didn't see too much of, one thing I liked about the scene is
she goes to the Roadhouse first.
Yeah, and
that is what I was going to go ahead and say. She goes ahead to the Roadhouse, where the log lady stops her at the front and says how this is when this fire starts, it's hard to put out, and how all goodness is in jeopardy. And Laura kind of just pushes past the log lady after she finishes saying her piece. And inside, we see the band. There's a woman singing a song we've heard before about a blue world. And Laura is watching this woman sing as she cries. That's when Laura looks over at Jacques Renault, who's working at the bar, and Jacques is waiting for something. Laura goes ahead and nods. Two men come over, bringing her a drink and leaving some money, and they're pretty much. She's saying this isn't going to cover it. And as he's asking, so wait, do you go all the way, little girl? And that's when Donna comes over, and she's trying to get involved, and Laura is trying to tell her, what are you doing here? And eventually Donna takes a drink, and she shoots it down. And that's when Laura starts kissing the one man, pulling away, looking at Donna. And so Donna does the same to the other. That's when Laura says they can go. And that's when they get to the Bang Bang Bar.
Well, yeah, it's the Roadhouse is got the bang bang thing on that. And I was going through that scene, so that's why I said that. But what I was going to say there too before the log lady was, as she's walking across, it's at night. There's this like dog that like just walks across the street, and I just went, that just looked like and felt like it was unplanned. I'm like, I like that little detail in there too, because now we're getting into the dark side of Twin Peaks. It's the nighttime. We get some really adult stuff going on here, and we're a little more than halfway through the movie at this point. So we're getting to the big night, the big event of what happens to her, basically her dying, as well as how it happens and who's involved and how it goes down. So it's, in a way, it's almost anticlimactic because we know, but we still want to see it because we don't know it. We only imagine it in season one, and that's a great thing. But yeah, what I liked here is this was an extended scene. We've talked about before, when you do this, you kind of get drawn into it. It slows things down. It pulls you into the scene, because we'll go back there where like some dirty blues is playing, nothing hardcore, but you get some woman dancing erotically. There's bunches of red lights. It's a smoke-filled room. And what I liked here too was we had talked about before how Donna and Laura were talking about things and how she knew she was uptight and how Laura wasn't, and vice versa. So it seems like a general relationship. But when you got Jacques Renault here, this overweight, fat, disgusting looking bartender pig, and him and Laura start going at it, sucking each other's tongue down their throat. It's really disgusting or whatever. But you know what? When you're in a bar like that and you're partying and you've got cocaine and you got drugs and all that, totally believable. Also, everyone who's been to clubs has seen all this kind of stuff. It might be a little more, I don't know what the word would be today, modernized, but this totally seems to work. We know bad things are going to happen. And can you fault him for wanting to party and do stuff? I mean, we can argue about legality and ethics, but she's 18, so it was Donna, so we're all adults here. But the lady that's stripping while the guitarist is going on, she's completely nude. There's not a lot of talking going on. It's a lot of eye contact, watching what's going on. And, John starts chugging the beer. There's starting to be some heavy petting on the floor. Laura's top comes off, completely nude. I got to say, one of the darkest scenes in here as this continues is not watching Donna start making out with the one dude. It's not like they're competing, the two ladies, like we might think. It's the fact that when at one point Laura's kind of so whacked out on whatever, alcohol, drugs, and everything, she's sitting at the table looking over. The one dude she's being a whore for slides on her table and starts giving her oral sex, starts eating her out. Her and Don are looking at each other talking, and there's the comment, oh, this is like when we were back at One Eye Jack's, because remember, they both did work there. She looks over and she sees Donna, and Donna's like bent over with her head leaning back, her top's off, and this guy's going to work at her. I'm like, this is about as soft core porn as you can get that probably would get allowed in any movie, and certainly not made at all today. But again, it's the same music playing, very simple little bluesy kind of heavy drum thing. They're arguing. You really can't hear what they're saying too much. It's a great scene. You get the shot of empty beer balls, tons of cigarettes burning out on the floor before they cut away to the next day. Awesome scene. It sets us up for what's going to happen here at the end.
Yeah, because Laura pretty much took Jacques and had him help her get Donna out of there.
Yep.
She screamed whenever she saw Donna on that table. And moving to the next day, we get to Laura's house. Leland comes home where Laura and Donna both are. And Donna's asking questions about last night and asks if she was mad because she wore her stuff. She doesn't know how she got home or anything. And Laura says, I don't want you wearing my things. And Donna gets a little upset and says, Laura, I love you. And that's when Laura says that she loves her, but she doesn't want her to be like her. Donna asks why she does it as Leland enters. And as Leland is looking at them, it cuts from them to Ronette and Laura in in some lingerie, and that's when he tries to snap back to reality and says, Laura, we need to go. Time for breakfast. And she says goodbye to Donna, and quickly they leave. As they're driving, there's a bad driver behind him, and he is going around, and he looks like he's... You wouldn't want to be driving behind him. But that being said, you meet an awful lot of these kind of drivers here in Florida.
Of course, they're all out of state, too.
But this man at least has an excuse. He only has one arm. Yes, the one-armed man. I'm trying to remember his name. Gerard, I think.
Lieutenant Philip Gerard. Wait a minute, just Gerard. That's what we'll call him. It was a knockoff of The Fugitive from the 60s, just to say it again. That's why he's named Gerard. I like that by Lynch. He liked it, so he said, screw it, I'm going to name this one-armed guy, and I'll have him on my show. I think it's awesome.
He looks over from his car, rolls down the window. He says to tow the car, and how the thread will be torn. The thread will be torn. Before looking at Laura and saying, it's your father. That's when he drives off. And Leland and Laura quickly go to a car shop, and he's asking if Laura is all right. We then hear Leland, and it cuts between that moment then and him in a motel room with a girl that looks to be Teresa.
Yeah, Teresa Banks.
Yep. Laura then snaps him back to reality again, asks who that was. Do we know him? And Leland says, no. We don't know him, honey. We don't know him at all. Then we cut again. And it's Leland going through a hotel, and there's an open door. And he was supposed to be meeting Teresa, but inside the room, we see Laura and Ronette in that lingerie we mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it was last year. He quickly goes to Teresa and he pays her and says, I'm chickening out. Sorry. And as he goes away, we see the boy come out of the bushes and he's skipping around. Laura then brings him back to reality once more and asks if Leland came home during the day last week. He says no. And he looks at all the mechanics looking at them and says, to leave them alone, go back to work. And Laura says, I thought I saw you. And he says, well, wait, you know what? Now that I think about it, I did come home on Friday. I wasn't feeling well, got a little rest. And he asks, where were you? And she quickly says, oh, just down the road. And that's when we cut away.
Yeah, one thing in this scene here too that you didn't mention that I'll fill in with too, and that's what we do here. And when Gerard was yelling and screaming at them at that intersection, he was talking about the thread being broken. He has his hand out. He's got the ring on, the jade owl type ring. And then, when the scene's over, Laura's, at her bed at night, and she's going through some of these scenes in her head, and she goes, yes, I see that. Then she has a flashback of seeing it where it was on Teresa Banks' ring finger. And there's some lighting going on in her head. She's freaking out. And Palmer, it's like a descent into madness here too. We see him downstairs and he's really, really, really pissed. And this is brutal, man. This guy owns it. He's sweating a little bit, and it cuts away and we see him actually, oh gosh, how do we say it? We're used to of seeing him do some nasty things. We're getting it now because he breaks on Teresa Banks' trailer, pummels the crap out of her with the lead pipe. And it's brutal scene, all that too. So it's just a quick flash, and yeah, he'd whacked her because he wanted to go even more decadent. He wanted other women, and when he found out it was these girls that are almost underage, one of them being his daughter, that's why he panicked. You get Laura after that with a smaller diary with the key, and of course some cocaine in her. She's snorting too. So we get a little bit of that. We see her back at school talking to Bobby, and half these scenes we see her in, she's somewhat coherent, like when she's with Donna, but other times she's just, whenever she's with Bobby or any of the unsavory elements, if you will, or doing something bad, she's just coked out of her head, or she just looks like she's high because they're talking about stuff. And Bobby's telling her, you've got to meet me tonight, blah, 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 because Bobby's got this drug deal he's got to figure out. And they quickly cut to that. And it's at night. She's kind of acting really high and all that too. And he's trying to be serious a little bit because he was with her. They were an item and they're not together anymore, but he's her drug hookup. So she's basically using his attention for drugs, and he's kind of letting that happen, which he didn't like that he did that when we saw it in season 1. But here we can see them both a little bit coked out, and we see him with the flashlight and somebody coming out, and guess who comes out of the woods? I believe this is the same guy that was Sheriff Cable's muscle from early in the movie, and he's got the cocaine. Bobby shoots his ass, bam. It's like, oh, it is kind of all related there too, and it's pretty graphic. It's 2 shots to the head, 2 shots to the dome, as L. Cool J would say, and Laura's freaking out about it. And I almost laughed too because Bobby kind of realizes what he did. He's like, fuck, and it's late at night, and he had dropped the flashlight on the ground. You see the chunks of the guy's brain and smoke coming out of it, and he's laying face down in the muck. And Bobby's sitting there trying to just pull like 1 or 2 handfuls of dirt over, like he's gonna bury him up or whatever, because he's so whatever. Then Laura starts laughing, and he's like, "Shut the fuck up! This isn't funny." He's really, really an intense guy, and I like it. He's like, "Help me bury him." We knew he was involved in bad stuff, but we never really got to see it, Bobby, that is. And so he gets to own something that we're of in his past. We don't have to, in a prequel like this, introduce something new. The stuff that was alluded to, stuff that we filled up images in our mind of all through season 1, maybe some of that got watered down in season 2 because of the way some of the angles went. But this brings it right home and center that almost everybody's not like they seem, and they're involved in very bad things. Laura gets hysterical. They go to run away, and then it cuts to the next day with James pulling up on his motorcycle bike. So let me go ahead and pause here so you can fill in.
Yeah, I just want to go ahead and say that I don't know why they kept saying, "You killed Mike, Bobby." And he doesn't even know if he killed Mike or not. Obviously, he didn't. It just felt kind of stupid to me. Out of the 2, she at least has the excuse of she's drugged out of her mind. I don't know. But the next morning, James rides up to Laura's house, honks for her, and he asks where she was and asks if she's on something again. Leland goes out of the house, watching, waiting, and she doesn't really answer, and she says she has to go. Quickly goes to night. She has a little nose candy, as we put it, before bed. We see Leland with Sarah, and he's offering a glass of milk, which she chugs down. He then leaves his room, turning on the fan. Sarah in bed, looking down, sees a white horse in her room that quickly disappears.
The white pony.
That's right.
Another euphemism for cocaine. Did you think he
Before-
was drugging the milk?
Oh yeah, there was a drug in the milk. Yeah, Bob drugs Sarah, so that way he can have his time. We cut to Laura's cut open window. The lights flash. She kind of pushes off the covers as Bob enters through. He goes ahead and he climbs over Laura, and as he is starting to have his way, she takes his face and asks, "Who are you? Who are you?" Before it keeps cutting and cutting, and we eventually see Leland's face, and that's when she screams. And then we go to the next morning. He says how he'd like to talk to her. He seems to be normal. He seems to be actual Leland, not possessed Leland. And he's saying, "Oh, well, honey, I'd really like to talk to you." And that's when she fights back, tears before going into the kitchen. But Leland soon leaves the room, as in, "I'll go talk to her." And Laura's in her room. And as he goes up, he's saying, "Laura, honey." She looks at him, she's disgusted. And it's understandable, as she says to stay away from me. He watches her leave, and then he seems to be taken over again as his expression kind of twists. And we see Laura walking down the street. The world is spinning around her. And during class, the room also, as time is just passing, and she's looking just distraught. And eventually she leaves, and it cuts to this empty desk. And that's when we go to Bobby and Laura kissing, and he's trying to kiss a little deeper when she's like, "No, not tonight." And he asks where she's going, and she answers home. Bobby pretty much says that she doesn't want him. She just uses him for the drugs, but he seems to be okay with that. She goes home, and she says goodnight to her mother. And while she's in her room, she goes ahead, has another quick sniff while she's changing, and that's when she gets a call. It's James, and she says that she'll meet him in 15 minutes. And she doesn't know why she said that, as she's finishing getting ready, and that's when she looks through the angel picture, and we see the angel now disappear. She climbs down the trellis and goes to James, and they ride off together. Leland sees this through the window. They go to the woods, and he asks what the hell is wrong with her. She explains how she has no place left to go. And James says, "But we have everything." She's saying that, "No, we have everything but everything." He's trying to affectionately, in a comforting way, say her name. She instantly mocks him for that before slapping him. And James, being the sappy love puppy that he is, says that he knows they love each other. And she admits it, yes, she does love him. And they start to kiss before she pulls away. And her expression gets serious, saying that he might try to kill him. Then she screams, but there's nobody behind him, and he can't see anything. She then seems to be losing her sense of what's going on as she's saying, "Bobby killed a guy." And she offers to show the body, and he says, "What body?" And she's like, "That's right. Yes, what exactly?" And one more expression, she loses the kind of dazed look. to say that he wants to take her home now. She's done there. Do you want to take it from here?
Well, because we're pretty much finishing up here before the last really big scene here. All I'll say is when Laura was on the phone, she's in the room, she's coking up again. She's drinking little bar shots that she had squirreled away. She's wearing these 80s kind of panties that girls wore a lot back then too. And it's pretty sexy. It's pretty hot. She's putting on her screw me clothes because she's going to go whore out and party. And this is obviously going to be the night that, things are going to go down. And to me, I'll say this just because there's not too many more characters to talk about. We gave James a little bit of shit, over the episodes, especially with the stupid song he had, Just You, and all that. But that is who he is, and he's actually one of the few that seems decent guys in him. I don't recall a bad thing necessarily about him. He's definitely boned the most out of everybody, it seems like. He just is who he is. So he didn't come across that way at all in this movie, and he's in there just enough with it too. But it did feel like Laura was breaking up with him because while she loves him, she may not respect him because she needs to have something bad, because we know Laura, despite being on drugs, being abused, she's fascinated by it. That attracts her. It's just the way things are. And we know her and Renette kind of are buddies in the sense that they're going to party together and screw around together. But yeah, basically we're going to the cabin in the woods late at night here at Jacques' cabin or whatever. And it's going down. There's the music playing.
Don't forget Waldo.
Well, Waldo the bird, yeah, that we saw too. Leland Palmer had kind of made his way up there, and he's kind of watching what's going on there too, and he's furious, and it kind of reminds me of, what I'd mentioned earlier. Well, if I can't have you, nobody else will, because we see that Jacques, and again, he's just kind of fat and disgusting. He wants her all tied up. He's in those horrible tidy whities and a shirt. This just looks awful and disgusting. Leo, we knew, was not the best of guys, and he's holding Ronette back or whatever. It's pretty brutal because, Jacques goes outside, Leland's there, and he kind of beats the crap out of him a little bit, hits him over the head. Leo's putting his clothes back on, seeing what's going on. These girls look like they've been brutalized. It's one nonstop scene. We also even see the one-armed man running there too. You see Leland Palmer running with the two girls through the woods. The one-armed man looks like he's behind. We get a shot zooming in of the rail car where we see Bob there in his glory, and they get tied up in there. And there's some nasty images here with Ronette being tied up and Laura and Bob in there, and some flashing lights, and a picture of a guardian angel kind of sort of being looked at too. I mean, symbolism, I guess, might be a thing if you're into that. But Ronette manages to almost kind of escape a little bit. We see Laura with the ring on because Gerard looks like he threw it in there, with Bob going on there, and there's a bunch of cut scenes really flashed together here with some really dramatic operatic type music or whatever, with her getting her ass beat and that strobe-like effect of lights and darkness and her neck and blood and stuff, and Gerard just kind of walking away while Arnett seems to be laying on the ground by himself. And then we also see the face of Leland and Bob kind of going back and forth while they're wrapping her up in the bag of plastic that we would come to know from the very first episode, the very first scene there at the lake, of what would happen. Leland takes her and he's walking off. He checks on Arnett, who appears to be dead, so he just leaves her. And we know, of course, that she's not dead, but we do see him in the middle of the night, Leland, taking his daughter in that plastic bag, dropping her off, and we get a shot of the was it Glastonbury Cove or Grove, where the entrance is, and we see Leland walking over there. So let me go ahead and pause right here before we go in for that final quick scene of being inside the Grove. What was your take here?
I mean, this is what it led to. Interesting things during the scene, though. We flash between reality as we see it and the little man, and he's not very happy. You can tell that he's disturbed as what's going on is going on. During one of the moments, Leland put a mirror in front of Laura, and it flashed between actually her and Bob. And she screamed at that, obviously. And it seems that it didn't matter. He didn't take her over. He ended her right then and there. And as she's floating off, we know what's to come. In the Red Room, we see, well, Leland kind of floating. He was falling to the ground, but he's lifted, and we see Bob right next to him. Waiting in the Red Room was the one-armed man and the little man. And the little guy goes ahead and he puts his hand on the one-armed man's shoulder. And together they say, want all my Garbonmozio? Garbonmozio, yeah. Which means pain and suffering. Bob then throws blood down on the floor, and we see what looks to me to be the little man eating creamed corn. And then a monkey. That's really weird, yeah. But it cuts to the next morning where Laura's body is found. And we get one final look in the Red Room, going forward into a corner before cutting to see Laura sitting there with Dale, smiling at her as his hand is kind of on her shoulder to comfort her. Light flashes, and we see from above an angel, Laura, looking down and crying. Dale loses his smile, and Laura nods, starts to smile and kind of laugh with tears down her cheeks. And we pull away from Laura and Cooper as Angel Laura is kind of put over it, and a final white light before the movie ends with one final look at Laura Palmer's face. That's the end.
Yeah, and a lot of people got pissed when this movie came out because, like I say, you didn't know what the hell was going on, what all these damn images meant. You didn't know, unless you really watched it, paid attention to details, what it meant. People weren't necessarily able to go back immediately and watch it unless they taped it on the VCR. I liked it a lot. I gotta say, it does what a film should do, where it shows you more things rather than does everything. And I've often said here on the Xtreme Movie Show that it's hard to get invested emotionally into a movie if you don't care about a character. And for a lot of films, I think that's a very good place to start. However, that's not so always true. And while we enjoy Cooper, he's not a significant figure here. And while Laura is, she's not a good person. She has her flaws. We can talk about why she has them, but the bottom line is that's what's presented. It just gets fleshed out so we understand what's going on here. And I think it's just a nice little reflection of life. People aren't who they say they are. They have dark sides that they like. They have desires that we all share, whether we're, the class president, valedictorian, cheerleader, I should have everything personal, Laura Palmer, or some scuzzy scumbag like Jacques Renault is just an opportunistic fat guy. And if you're in his position and you had a chance to bone an 18-year-old coked out of her mind, would you do it? Of course you would, especially if it's by free choice. And I'm certainly not advocating any particular types of behavior for the sensitive types that may listen to it, but I think that the Twin Peaks fans who listen to this aren't. But it's just neat because they introduced this concept of the ring in here and whether that may or may not help you. We didn't really get too much, I think, fleshed out with the black and white lodge and stuff, other than they're probably just symbols for, good and bad, or some people might even go religiously and say heaven and hell, although I don't think it's that explicit, despite the fact we saw some images of a guardian type angel character. But that's kind of a common theme that I think you see in a lot of things, no matter what spirituality you may profess to be. So overall, I enjoyed it a lot. I'm glad that it was a lot darker than season 2. Of course, nobody really likes season 2 for the most part. I like how they fit in Harold Smith, a few other side characters, and here everybody has something to do. It really reaffirmed, going out on a strong note, what I thought Twin Peaks could be. The fact that he wanted to come do this after not being a part of season 2 made me appreciate Twin Peaks and always remember it in the back of my mind. So here we are 30 years later, someone you, the millennial man in your early 20s, had never really watched it and didn't know too much about it, wanted to see it. I kept my mouth shut because it had been a long time since I seen it. And with us getting ready to cover season 3, it'll be interesting to see what directions they go, because you got to be on point with this kind of stuff. It's not something you just pick up and watch. And I appreciate the fact that David Lynch reached for that level of quirkiness that he's known for in his films. And so some people say you love Lynch or you hate Lynch. It's either or. And frankly, I've enjoyed a lot of what he's done. Some of it not so much, but Twin Peaks is one of them. I still say, at least that first season, it's one of the best TV shows of all time. But for this movie, it's definitely a cult movie. If you're not a Lynch fan and not a Twin Peaks fan, it is probably not for you. And to understand it, I think you do actually have to watch it. So that might be considered a negative for some. But overall, I enjoyed it. What are your final thoughts?
I found it a little unnecessary, I'm going to admit. We didn't really learn anything other than the fact that the old lady and the young boy were actually spirits, and we meet a monkey. But other than that, we knew a lot of this information. We had figured out the death of Laura Palmer, and now we're just seeing it. And while it's performed perfectly well, I just found it unnecessary at this point. But that's where Lynch and Frost disagreed, and Frost left the project because Lynch wanted to do a prequel more than a sequel, which is what Frost wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I think a sequel might have served it better, or perhaps more mentioning of a good Dale, because the lodge exists outside of time and space. So when the good Dale is in there, I'm pretty sure that means our Dale Cooper from the series, where we've met him at this point. And that's why Annie Blackburn was there. But overall, like I said, I just find it a little unnecessary. It wasn't bad. There were supposed to be 2 more movies, but because of how this one performed, there weren't. And I'm kind of glad. But we do have season 3 to go over, and that's where my excitement lies.
We'll see how it goes too. Hopefully you won't find that extraneous as well too. And you can take a lot of different ways, which is the ultimate model that Lynch wanted. And I guess movies are extraneous in a way too, because you're right, this didn't really say anything new. It didn't really cover any new ground. It really just fleshed out some details and everything too. And I think that's all I really want to do. So in a way, I will say that I think that was successful. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Fire Walk with Me, Twin Peaks, the 1992 film that bombed, and not a lot of people seem to like at the time, but I think the cult Twin Peaks fans really seem to enjoy at least a chunk of them too. And I don't think it introduced too many more red herrings or non sequiturs, if you will, things that confused you more. It just kind of displayed them. And I think it was David Lynch's way of just saying, all right, I'm going to put my stamp on my original creation. Thank you, Mark Frost. Step aside while I do this. So that being said, ladies and gentlemen, check us out on the Twin Peaks review here on the Xtreme Movie Show. We primarily focus on movies, obviously, definitely a little bit of television, some select pieces, but also 80s films, action, martial arts, you name it, we've got it covered too. If you got a selection, let us know. But looking forward to joining Professor Peaks, actually, for season 3 as we get started on that here too of Twin Peaks. For Professor Pixel and everybody involved here at the Xtreme Movie Show, I'm your host, Rob. Have a good night, and as always, everybody, stay extreme.
Bye.